Welcome. My name is Aisha Delaney-Brumsey. I am the Director of Community-Based Services for New York City Health and Hospitals Office of Behavioral Health. I am so excited to host this jam today. We're going to be talking to a few people who are themselves on the front lines of crisis care. So this is a day in the life of crisis care, part one, someone to contact. Next slide. Quick reminder, keep yourself on mute so we don't get background noise, and really good idea to put on the speaker view. Feel free to put questions in the chat. As I'm able to, I'll pull those out, but also many of the presenters will be able to respond as well. And get ready for the hot seat trivia poll. We said this before the meeting started, but there is a new ASL feature. It's either under your button that says interpretation or the button that says more. And you can click on that. You can see the ASL sign language interpreter, or you can also click on transcript and watch the transcript live. This is absolutely one of my favorites slides of this whole presentation. Since 2020, we've had 543 unique speakers across the more than 200 episodes, which is amazing. And do you have an idea for an episode? If so, reach out to the Crisis Jam team, to Karen Jones, to David Covington. Send in your ideas. I know they're always looking for innovative ideas. And the fun thing today is we have 5 brand new people who have never spoken as speakers. Some of them have been facilitators, including our very own Karen Jones, who keeps this engine moving. So really excited for all of the first timers here. Just a reminder, talk.crisisnow.com. You can, of course, get all of the resources that are on there, but a new feature is that we are also live streaming these episodes. So as you know, since you're in this room, you do have to pre-register for the Zoom. If for some reason you're having trouble with that, or if one of your colleagues is, you can watch the live stream on YouTube. But we do encourage you to try to pre-register and come here, because this is really where the majority of people are, where the conversation and action is happening. And that button on the left, the Register for Crisis Jam, is how you do it. Make sure to share it with all of your colleagues. And you can also see, of course, all of the old episodes on YouTube, but the most recent one is linked here, as well as various other resources and news. And this is great. You can kind of see how the YouTube page is set, the variety of episodes. I think almost all of the episodes across the, 5-year history are up there, or a good chunk of them. So tons of good information. And just want to highlight some upcoming sessions. As you all know, we've been doing more of the Crisis Jam debates. It's an amazing opportunity to hear from big thinkers in this field and hear their differing opinions on what will work well and dig in deep and into a topic. So upcoming next, we have a great one on 988 sustainability, and particularly around should states enact the legislation that includes a 988 fee. So we'll hear the pro and con on that. We also have a future one in June. Crisis facilities should require parents to stay during a crisis. We have the person who's going to take the affirmative on this. We do need someone who's going to take the negative side. So if you have suggestions, again, reach out to Karen, to David. And same for this. We're going to be talking about coordinating follow-up care and crisis services, and how that requires a high-tech solution. We need an affirmative and a negative on that. Also, if you did not see the last live and on location, it's very much worth going back and taking a look at that. We're really focusing on the types of facilities that serve as direct law enforcement drop-offs, really about keeping people out of the hospital, keeping people out of jail. The next one that's going to be coming up in June we'll look at Columbus, Ohio's in Franklin County, a facility that they are building there. It will have 60 recliners, and 16 inpatient beds as well. So a really fantastic facility that the folks in Franklin County and in Columbus, Ohio, and Ohio in general are building. You will have Erica Clark-Jones on that, as well as some special guests who will be speaking to what this crisis center is going to be like. Okay, now for the latest news. For those of us who are Marvel fans, or for those of you who are not, there's a new movie out right now, Thunderbolts, and it really addresses suicide and mental health in a way that previous Marvel movies have not touched on, which is great because these kinds of movies obviously have huge popular impact. So it's another way to make discussion about mental health more common. And the director and star are have praised Marvel for this. So there's a great news clip that you can find on the website. We might also drop the link in the chat as well. This next is just highlighting some additional resources or new resources from HHS, particularly some of the work around the 988 911 integration. That's up on the HHS website. There are also there's also t-shirts. Now, it doesn't seem like you can buy the t-shirts on the website as far as we can tell, but they have all of the materials that you need to make the t-shirts. And so this one's a really beautiful one. No judgment, just help. There's also another beautiful one on You Are Not Alone. So really fantastic resources. And skilled caring support anytime. All right. And so now I'd like to bring up David Covington for the Lived Experience Library.
Josh Riverdale, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you. Has it been almost a decade since we've been together?
It's been almost a decade. I was just thinking about that. It's been since Atlanta that I've seen you in person.
Yeah, Zero Suicide 2 in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And Josh, I think one of the reasons you came to that event was because of so many of us grow up with this idea that suicide can be inevitable for some. And you wrote the Gospel According to Josh. For those of you in the Crisis Jam audience, Josh is an actor, a producer, a playwright. Josh, tell us about briefly the Gospel According to Josh and what you wanted to bring.
Yeah, thank you, David. This was something, my dad had died by suicide in 2009. My grandfather died in the 1960s. In 2011, in early 2011, I was in crisis myself, multiple major changes, undiagnosed, untreated mental illnesses, and the trauma of having lost my father. And so I nearly attempted got help. And over this period of maybe 3 to 5 months, I was like, okay, I'm going to get help, but I'm also going to be a helper. So I started telling my story a bit. And then I was like, okay, like I have this play that the book was eventually based on, and the play itself did really well in New York City. And I realized that after I had done this play in New York, and it was just supposed to be regular theater, I was like, there are people who are talking to me about getting help afterwards. And I wasn't really equipped about that at the time. So I went and wrote this book based on the play, and then kind of expanded and got a lot of training and different things. So then when I was able to tell my story again, I was able to resource people properly and also have some of the background. So I really wanted to show people just kind of what you said, David, that this is not inevitable. It is preventable. And like, you are not beholden to whatever you come from. You don't have to be that. And I didn't have to die by suicide, and I could even change the trajectory of my family and my own life. So that's a bit of what I wanted to share with that. Yeah.
Josh, thanks so much for being with us. This is in a tradition of, I think, a host of work that followed William Styron's A Darkness Visible and is really transforming our view of recovery. So, Josh, we'd love to have you back on the program and talk more about your work in this space and really your efforts to champion the voices of lived experience.
Thanks, brother. I'll be back anytime. Just say the word. All right.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now, one of my personal favorites, we are on the Crisis Trivia Hot Seat, and the audience is in the hot seat. So the question we have to answer is, 16 states have dedicated funding for 988, 11 through a monthly telecom fee, and 5 through reoccurring appropriations. When you compare that funding to each state's population, you get a revealing metric. So the metric is per capita funding, and using NAMI's Reimagining Crisis website as the data source for funding, which state has the highest per capita funding for 988? Is it Delaware? Is it Utah? Is it Oregon? Is it Washington State? And you should see a poll pop up on your screen, and feel free to participate in that. This virtual room is always a strong contender for the hot seat.
Karen, are we having a technical? There it is.
All right, we're going to give a few more minutes for folks to put in their guess. And here we go. This is the data that we looked at. It was on it's on NAMI's website, because you can see it as well. Right here, you can see which states have a fee in yellow, which states have a recurring appropriation in green, and which ones are pending a fee bill. Here's how much money each of them have invested in this resource. And here's the population. So what that gives you as a final answer is the dollars per person. And so you can already see the answer here if you're a quick reader, but, and this is the funding overall, but the answer is Utah, which actually 32% of folks said yes to. So congratulations, that is the majority, that is the largest group of us here. But also you weren't off by much if you thought it was one of the other states, because Delaware is the second highest per capita, Oregon's the third highest, and Washington is the fourth highest. So big thanks to Representative Steve Illison and his leadership in Utah for pushing forward this really significant investment in the 988 resource. All right. And now I'm really excited to bring up Sherry Sinwelski, Dayanara Ciceras, and Rachel McLaughlin for our Crisis Jam. Sherry will be moderating a panel with both Dayanara and Rachel talking about their experience working at the front lines of 988 and crisis hotlines. So Sherry, I'll pass to you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I'm happy to be here on Crisis Jam today. Just a moment about myself. My name again is Sherry Sadowski, and I'm the Vice President of Crisis Care at D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services. I've been working in the field of crisis hotlines pretty much my entire career for over 30 years, and actually started as a crisis line counselor when I first began this work. And it's just amazing to take a moment to reflect on the changes that have happened over the last 30 years. I literally remember taking my first calls on the hotline, taking notes on paper. That's how we did our notes on each call. And we had index cards in a plastic box for referrals. So we have come a long way. And I'm just so excited to be able to share a little bit today with Dayanara and Rachel about their work now as crisis line counselors for 988. So I'd like to just first start by allowing them to introduce themselves. We'll start with Rachel. Rachel, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you do? I know you both have long histories in working on the crisis lines as well.
Hello, I'm Rachel McLaughlin. I've been in crisis work now for 8 years and some change. I'm currently with Protocol Services. I had originally started at a call center in Colorado, which is where I'm from. I'm in the Denver metro area. Um, you know, I accidentally sort of fell into crisis work, but it was something I was good at and it was something I loved, and I haven't left in the last 8 years, which is a long time for me.
Thank you, Rachel. And Dayanara, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Yanira Cáceres, and I am a bilingual program coordinator for the Suicide Prevention Center at D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services. And I have been
Wow.
in crisis work for 5.5 years. I started as a volunteer. I worked as a bilingual crisis counselor, as a supervisor. So I've held many roles in which I've really been able to support individuals. And kind of like Rachel mentioned, I've learned I'm passionate about it, and here I am still.
Wonderful. Dayanara, you told us that you work as a bilingual program coordinator. Tell us a little bit about what that means, specifically the bilingual part, and why you think that's an important aspect of 988.
Yeah, so at the Suicide Prevention Center at D.D. Hirsch, we have several Spanish dedicated programs where we have counselors who specifically respond to Spanish help seekers. And as a crisis counselor for those lines, it was it's really important because that population needs a lot of support, the Hispanic population. Mental health is something that is not often talked about within that population. So being able to inform them about suicide, about how they can help their loved ones, has been really impactful uh, for our help seekers.
Thanks. Rachel, you said that you just fell into crisis work, and maybe that's how it happened. But usually, I hear that there's usually a bigger why as to why people get into this work, and not only get into it, but why they stay doing this work. Tell me a little bit about what's your why? Why do you do this?
Yeah. I mean, I've always known that I wanted to help people. My original sort of stint into behavioral health was in substance use. Um, and I ended up getting laid off, and I had someone that said, "Hey, come over here." And so that's kind of how it ended up in crisis work. But then, I realized that I can really make a big difference. And that way I was good at the work. Even those tough calls that don't always feel really great, like if you get through it, you work through it, it still feels good to know that you could have made even a small difference. Um, and as I've worn many different hats throughout my career, I've also learned how much I love to support other people that are doing this work, getting to share my knowledge and helping them build skills, as well to be able to do this work because it's not easy, but it is very rewarding.
Thanks, Rachel. Deanira, how about you? What keeps you doing what you do? I know that this is hard work that you guys are doing every day.
Yeah, so, since I was younger, I remember experiencing difficult moments in my life and feeling alone sometimes. So, as I was growing up, I realized I didn't want anyone else to feel alone during their, hardships. And so I started making sure that I was able to support my friends, my family. And then as I grew older, I was like, I'd love to do this. I'd love to do this for a living. I'd love to support other people feel less alone. And I found out about suicide and suicide prevention efforts through my master's program at the time in 2017. And I learned that if I wanted to be in the mental health field, I needed to know more about suicide prevention. And I came across Dee Hirsch and I applied as a volunteer, and the rest is history. But I love what we do. I think it's important work. I wish everyone was in this field. So yeah, that's what keeps me here.
Awesome. So you guys can talk with a variety of people during shifts on the line, um, chat, text with them depending on what modality you're using, and you never really know what's going to be on the other end, right? And sometimes it's a suicide call, as Deanna said, and sometimes it's not. Some people have crises that are more personal or more specific to the situation that they're going through. And I'm curious, what kind of training have you all received to help you to feel confident in doing this work? So tell us a little bit about how you prepared to become a crisis counselor. Rachel, maybe.
Center here in Colorado. And then I also went through protocols training, which I thought was really great. I think one of the most important parts is that we did really focus a lot on how do you make yourself comfortable during shift? How do you care for yourself physically? How do you care for yourself sort of like mentally, and building resiliency? And I think that's incredibly important. But also the 988 Lifeline trainings are really great. I do enjoy those. Um, but I think that that resiliency piece is so strong that that is really what sticks out in my mind. And I loved that protocol had such an emphasis on that. And just starting to learn those skills. How do you actively listen? All of those things have been, I think, incredibly important, and they help you in other areas of your life as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Deanira, tell us about your training experience. We hear so how important wellness is, and learning how to take care of yourself in this work is so important. What happened in your training that really felt helped you to feel like you had the skills to really listen to people who might be in their worst moments?
Yeah, so I mean, Dee Hirsch has extensive training, so that was extremely helpful. Our training was several months. ranging from, lectures and really teaching us the basics of supporting individuals to really hands-on training with individual supervisor support on the lines. But beyond that, I think there's been a lot of wellness efforts that have really just highlighted the importance of self-care and of talking to others, right? We talk about in suicide prevention, we talk a lot about how it is very important to talk to others when someone is going through difficult times. And for frontline workers, it's just as important to make sure that we're connected, that we speak up, and that we take care of ourselves. So that has been really helpful with just continuing to learn and grow within the kind of work that we do.
Thanks. Um, so I'm curious if you guys can think back to, I'm sure you've talked to so many people over the years of the work that you've been doing, and of course, but with keeping confidentiality. I'm wondering, Rachel, if you might have a story to share about a call or a text or a chat that was just particularly impactful and why you thought it made a difference for that person.
Yeah, absolutely. I have several, but I think the one that's kind of coming to mind today is a familiar voice that we used to have at our Colorado Center. And they pretty consistently struggled, and people would struggle to work with them. And I remember getting on the phone with them one day. And I don't even remember what I said, but I kind of felt like the tension sort of melt away. And I was like, oh, my goodness, thank goodness. Like it really felt like we were making some like true progress that day and we had good connection. And that one event, especially whenever I worked with this caller, it really helped, us have rapport down the line in different situations to work through different, moments where they were thinking about killing themselves. And they were quite, I think, high risk, honestly. And so that always sticks out in my mind of like, if you have the patience, if you can sit through the tough calls, like you can truly make a difference for someone.
Yeah, kudos to you, Rachel, for being there for that person and all of the help seekers that have reached out.
I remember was calling because they felt overwhelmed with life, with the pressure of, having a family and having to provide and just, life in general. And this person stated that they had everything ready to kill themselves in the restroom. And, I gave him time. I listened. I expressed empathy. I validated his feelings and emotions. And, we made kind of a plan for what he can do to stay safe for a moment. And then he was very clear with me that if he didn't receive immediate mental health services, that he didn't know if he was going to be here any longer. So, we made a safety plan for the moment. And then I called him back with resources of where he can go to see a mental health therapist. And when I did, he thanked me and he said that he was going to be okay, that he was going to stay alive, that he was going to call and receive those mental health services. And it's one of those calls I'll never forget.
I bet. Dianera, when I hear you say that, this series that we're doing, A Day in a Life, it's going to focus on the crisis care continuum for 988. How 988 sort of is the first front door that people can call to talk to somebody when they're in crisis, but oftentimes they do need something more. And I think the call that you just talked about really just reiterates how important it is that, when a person's in crisis, that might be a short period of time, and they don't always have the ability to say, oh, I'm going to wait 2 weeks to see somebody to talk about this further. And so there's really an opportunity when a person is in crisis to try to connect them to that longer care if they need it. And I think that's why it's so important that, as we're building out 988, it's not just the crisis call that they might, many of our callers de-escalate at the end of our call, and that might be all they need. But for some, those next steps are so important. So thank you for that example and illustrating that. We all know that sometimes when we're working, we have bad days, right? And maybe we even have kind of our worst days. So tell me, what are some of the tough things about being a 988 crisis counselor? What would be a worst day scenario for you, Rachel?
Yeah, so sometimes it just feels like you get a theme of calls and they're all sort of similar. And I think the ones that stick out in my mind are like the ones where maybe someone's had bad experiences and it's really hard to break through. And they are sort of like, you know what, this isn't going to help. I don't even know why I called. And if you have, a couple of calls like that, that can be really exhausting. Um, and just like that, sometimes that emotional toll is a lot. And it, well, and now I forgot what I was going to say. Good time to forget. But calls, people are angry, they're upset, they're not feeling like there's much of a difference. And I always have to sort of remind myself in those moments that even if somebody hasn't greatly changed, like I probably did make a difference being an open ear and just listening for a little while.
We're like sponges as counselors on a crisis line, aren't we, Rachel? And, all of that kind of builds up inside of us. And even, some of that negative these callers were feeling. And again, that wellness is just so important so that we have a way to get that off of our shoulders when we're hearing all of these things that come in and on a crisis line. Deanira, what's it like for you? What are some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I was going to highlight similar to Rachel, but one of them for me was the toll of the work. As much as I've loved, supporting help seekers, I couldn't deny that it was impacting my ability to be there for my loved ones, right? Because I would spend 8 hours or so long, right, just listening to help seekers and supporting them that at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to, like, if a family member came to me with like, oh, this sad news, I'm like, I can't right now, right? But that's why self-care became increasingly important in the work, is just, reminding myself that that would allow me to keep doing what I was doing and be able to support my loved ones. And now it's great to see all the wellness efforts from 988 and specifically Dee Dee Hirsch, just that push to really support our frontline staff so that we can consequently support our help seekers. And that wellness aspect has become kind of a priority.
Yeah, Taylor Swift, shake it off, right? We've got to find a way to get that off our shoulders so we can keep doing this work every day. I mentioned when I first started about 30 years ago, I see some people in the chats talking about their first experiences. So much has changed over the last 30 years. I remember when I first started doing this, it kind of felt like we were in a little like this confidential location in a box. Nobody even really knew about crisis lines, not like they do now, and then over time, through SAMHSA and other efforts, we started to really come together as a community of crisis centers across the country with 1-800-SUICIDE, 1-800-273-TALK, that. And now we have 988. I know that both of you were here prior to 988, and now you've been working as 988 counselors for a couple of years. What have you seen sort of as the biggest changes since the implementation of 988, and what would you think are the top successes? Rachel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we definitely noticed there were more calls coming through once 988 officially launched. We were getting more calls through that Lifeline network. I love that it's just a 3-digit number. Like that's so much easier to access. I think that if you're in crisis, it's much harder to think about, I have to call this 10-digit number versus I have to dial 3 buttons that are pretty repetitive. So I think those things are really great. And the geo routing is great. That was always kind of a challenge. Somebody would call, we move now and keep the phone numbers, and that geo routing is really great to make sure that people get to where they need to be, especially if they need resources.
Yeah, thank you. Deanira, what would you add to that?
I mean, yes, the volume. The volume, I mean, I don't know if it tripled, quadrupled. It was a huge difference as a counselor. I saw the difference because we would have longer waiting periods prior to 988. And then it was just call after call and just access. I'm really happy about 988 because access, it's so much easier to dial, easier to give that number, and people can easily remember it.
Yeah. So we've really been able to reach more people with this easier to remember number. But we're still in our infancy. We're still growing. We still have goals that we want to do to make 988 even bigger and better. And before we wrap up, just quickly, anything that you think is important in terms of where we're headed next? Where would you like to see 988 go from here, Rachel?
I would love to just continue to see it grow, for counselors to continue to gain, even more competency as we learn more about crisis, and continue to train and keep those skills going.
Thanks, Rachel. How about you, Dianara?
Same, I would say more continuous trainings. I would like to see continued efforts in wellness and then also increased support for our minorities.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just want to take a moment to thank both of you for all of the work that you've done, all the lives that you've touched, and to all the other 988 crisis counselors across the nation. The work that you do is so important every day. So thank you for being on the front lines.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sherry, DNR, Rachel. Really amazing. You're resonating quite heavily with the folks on the call. There's a ton of people who took their first crisis calls a long time ago, and that they really resonated with that experience. So thank you so much. And we're going to call up our discussants. First, we have Helen Luttrell, the Chief Clinical Officer of Behavioral Health Link.
Hi all. Yeah, great panel. Thank you all, so much for sharing your experiences, and sort of what got you here today as well as ideas for the future. Spurred a lot of sort of thoughts in my mind. I really appreciate Sherry you starting us off with speaking to how times have changed, and we sort of wrapped up in that way. I know, like I said in the chat, I started answering the lines in 2012, and I worked an overnight shift. And if I wanted a supervisor to provide help, I had to call them on a physical landline, while also keeping the caller on the headset, and not letting them know that I was getting that help from the supervisor. And today it's a lot easier through a lot of our chat sort of formats. But definitely always remember it being such a privilege to help people, on their worst days. And I'm really glad that I had that experience for 3 years of being a crisis, telephone counselor, and that being my first foray into mental health care. I know, Deandra, you shared about how important it is to help people feel less alone, and I totally resonated with that as well, because I think that's so important for everyone really to hold central when we're doing this work, because we do get such a vast variety of people calling us, and sometimes people just need to know, I'm not alone, and it comes back to those basic crisis skills that Rachel you spoke about, important in training, those active listening, validating, and just really being that empathetic ear, and slowing down and not necessarily having to jump to planning or providing resources. That in itself is so healing and makes such an impact into people's lives. And I feel like that can be sort of a common mistake some newbies make. But when we ground ourselves in helping people not feel alone, that can be really helpful to remember those skills. And I definitely loved how much we focused in this panel on the importance of self-care. I think that's crucial to make sure that this work is sustainable. It's not just a job, it can be a career for years. And so I love that this panel highlights that really, really well, to be able to get through those harder moments that occur on the lines, whether it's we're being yelled at or getting maybe back-to-back calls where we're not, feeling like we're making that much of an impact, or, absorbing those emotions of others. We know it's a high turnover field, and so I'm definitely really happy to see that increase in investment go to taking care, of people that are spending their jobs taking care of others and really making a difference. So I also loved, Sherry, you shared that mantra to get through the hard times, to just reflect that, to shake it off. I love pairing that with like physically getting up and shaking off when we're having that harder day. but yeah, being able to lean on your supervisors, your peers is so important to help not take things personally during this work. And so I think that you all shared a lot of great insights into the day in the life at a crisis center, and appreciate you all.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was great reflections, and completely agree. It really resonated with me to hear about how the folks on the line took care of themselves in the process of taking care of other people, which you can hear the passion that everyone brought, and also the real challenge with doing this kind of work. So, our very own Karen Jones, welcome.
Thank
What were
you.
your
Thank you.
reflections?
I just wanted to add that through the Crisis Jam, through my work with Recovery Innovations, I've spoken to a lot of different areas of crisis counselors, from call centers to facility crisis call center work to inpatient. And the thing that has really hit me is the mission that drives so many of our staff members that answer that call every day. And I think that needs to be recognized because there is a strong motivation to take that call every day. It's not an easy job to do, and especially when you don't know what that day is going to look like, what that call is going to look like. Is this going to be an abusive caller? Is this going to be a caller that I can help? Or is this going to be someone that hangs up on me and I don't get to help them? You just don't know. And that self-care aspect is pivotal with the high otherwise the burnout rate is going to be just astronomical. So I just think that is a really important piece of this. So I wanted to just reflect on that, and I'm wondering if any of our panelists would like to share any things that they do or have in place to balance that aspect of self-care in order to be able to answer the call every day.
That's great. That's a great question. Any of the panelists want to jump on quick to answer that?
Yeah, I can share. Or Rachel, did you want to go?
You go ahead.
Okay. So I make sure to exercise to be active. It's really made a world of difference for me. And then make sure to spend time with my loved ones. Make it an actual effort because life can get in the way. So just making sure that that is also a priority for me really helps.
It's fantastic. Rachel, did you also want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree. Like the physical activity, most of my breaks, I jump outside and walk my dog for a few minutes. Um, but I also journal, and I always sort of am one of those kind of people that tend to see everything that's wrong. So I do force myself to think about what went well, what were my things, and I think that's really important to shift our perspective towards what did we do well, what went well. And journaling in general is great. Therapy is also really helpful. Um, Making sure you have people to talk to, just making sure that you have a life outside of your work is incredibly important so you can kind of blow off some steam.
Absolutely. I mean, all of us who are in the helping professions, it behooves us to remember that, we also need help. We also need a place and a way to keep ourselves healthy. So thank you so much. And one of the other things that I noticed, and I appreciate Sherry, you bringing this up, this is a little bit of a pivot, but you talked about what it was like when you first started your career at a crisis line and what it looks like now when Rachel and Diana are working. And I think a lot of folks in the chat noticed this, but to just hear how much change and how much progress we've made over that time, it's a good reminder that even though this work might feel slow, implementing new policies, new programs, it really does change over time for the better. So thank you all so much. There was one question in the chat that I don't think we were able to get to. I'm going to read it out loud, and if any of you are able to answer in the chat, that'd be great. Has a coworker, someone who's not in crisis, ever approached you because they have a problem, maybe with substance use, and how did you help them? And if either any of you have a perspective on that, please feel free to answer in chat, or quite frankly, anyone else in the room as well. So next up, Brian Hepburn, Nashville update. Welcome.
Thank you, Aisha. It's always good to see and hear you.
Likewise.
Thank you to the 988 Jam planning team. They do an excellent job. It's nice to see Karen on the Jam. She's usually in the background, does a great job. Also want to thank Sherry and Dianera and Rachel for sharing very important information. Also want to congratulate Chuck and Goglia on the National Council. I know there are many people that were in Philadelphia this week attending their annual conference. Some of us attended the pre-conference that was on crisis services and CCBHCs. And it was a really nice update, a reminder of how far we have come, but also a reminder of how far we have to go. In addition, I want to spotlight homelessness a little bit. The data on the homelessness issue, 2024 January study showed that there were about 750,000 individuals who were homeless. 25% approximately had serious mental illness. 40% approximately had serious substance use disorders. And we know the primary problem with homelessness is lack of housing, but we also know that a significant part of the problem is related to inadequate services and treatment for individuals with serious mental illness and serious substance use disorders. So I think we can do better. This is a national problem. You can go to any large city and it just jumps out at you, and it just the tendency of me and many of the people I know is to try and ignore it. But it's, if you open up your eyes, it's just right there in front of you, and it's just devastating. And we know that in order to prevent crisis, in order to recover from crisis, you can't be homeless. If you're homeless, the chances of you having a crisis is greatly increased. So I think we have a significant challenge ahead. But I bring it to this group because this group has been so good at creating national movement and national momentum. And I hope we can add homelessness as one of those important issues that we take on. So thank you, and back to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thanks for raising that. You know, I live in New York City, and every day it's you do see folks where it breaks your heart, people who are living on the street, people who are like unstably housed. So I appreciate you raising that need to think about the intersection between crisis and homelessness, and to always realize that first and foremost, people need housing, but there's also this need to address people's mental illness, their substance use, their history of trauma, the trauma that accumulates when you live on the street, all of that. So I just thank you so much. And I love the call to action for all of us to be looking at this intersection. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes. Next up, we have our state highlights, I believe. Yes, I'm bringing up Daniel Heron and Catherine Gilly. I believe Daniel from Vibrant, you're first. Is that correct?
Yep. Thank you, Aisha.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to provide everyone with some brief state legislation updates. As you probably know, most of the country has been in legislative session this year. Currently, there are 28 states still in an active session. States are starting to wind down, getting budgets passed, and getting closer to finishing up. A couple of bill updates. Want to flag in Alaska. Alaska has a 90-day fee bill that would set the monthly fee at 98 cents per month. That bill had a hearing in the House Health and Social Services Committee on May 1st. It's now sitting in the Labor and Commerce Committee, and it has hearings scheduled for both today and Friday, I believe. Yes, 5/9. That bill would create a separate account for dollars to go into, and would also provide funding for workforce operations, public awareness, and data collection. That bill also has been referred to 3 committees. So even after it gets out of Labor and Commerce, it will then have to go to another committee. So it has an uphill climb, but that's where it's at right now. I also want to highlight Hawaii House Bill 1462. That bill expands the crisis intervention and diversion services program to include 2 new crisis intervention and stabilization service sites on Oahu. It's expanding that and offering more services. One of those service sites has to be in a area with a disproportionate rate of individuals with mental health disorders and co-occurring mental health substance use disorders. That bill has made it. It's been a long way through on that bill. It's made it through both chambers, has been approved by the conference committee after changes were made, and is now pending governor's signature as of May 2nd. And with that, I will hand it over to Catherine for a couple more updates.
Thanks, Daniel. Just two more updates on my end. In North Dakota, Senate Bill 2200 has been signed by the governor. This bill originally had a fee attached to it. That was taken out, but it still appropriates $500,000 to 988 over the biennium. And then also in North Dakota, another bill signed by the governor, Senate Bill 2021, and that will direct a study to look at 911 and 988 fees and revenue. So promising progress there. And then Rhode Island had a pair of companion bills that would have added 988 to their existing 911 fee. So we understand that there's typically a surplus in that revenue source. But that it looks like as of yesterday evening, that bill has been held for further study. So it looks like that will not happen this year. That's all I've got for state updates. Thanks, Aisha.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much, Daniel. And you guys are seeing this fee slide again. Just want to remind you that we have an upcoming debate on 988 fee legislation next week, and the pros and cons of that around sustainability, et cetera. So definitely tune in for that. Next, I'm calling up Tina Soma for the Tech Corner, evaluating empathy of generative AI tools. I know I've seen a lot of my friends starting to use AI to help manage their own emotions. So I'm very excited to hear about your research.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Yeah, thank you so much. And, I'm really resonating with how folks, thank you so much for talking about personal experiences and working in the crisis call centers and working with help seekers and being call responders, and how the technology in that realm has really increased quite a bit to support call takers. And in the same vein, technology is also exploding in the greater public, that a lot of folks are accessing help, support, and care in a lot of really interesting ways, which also the regulation needs to catch up with it. Research needs to catch up with it. We need to make sure that folks are safe when they're accessing some of these Gen AI tools. Next slide, please. So we know that we've got a couple chatbots, conversational bots that are based on generative AI technology. So again, that is these large language models that are fed a ton of data. I can't even describe how much data they're fed, and that they're coming up with responses to different types of situations and different types of conversations that are not pre-labeled, pre-recorded, or predetermined. So that's what a generative AI conversational bot or chat bot is doing. We have some that are really focused on mental health conversations specifically, and there is more research that's being done to evaluate bots like WISA and WOBot on I saw one randomized control trial. I believe it was for WOBot, comparing the client-reported depression and anxiety symptoms as compared to a waitlist control of folks using some of these chatbots. So the research is catching up with the technology. We've also got the side of folks who are using large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, Claude, that are not specific and unregulated for the mental health space. And folks are having conversations with these chatbots and reaching out to support for a variety of reasons. I think we could all come up with a lot of different reasons, especially with folks who have done a lot of crisis work, that Are folks feeling too nervous to reach out to a human being? Does it feel too scary? What is the process of dialing even just that short 3-digit number onto your phone and then having what could be too much of a vulnerable interaction with a person on the other side, that perhaps talking to a computer might be a little bit easier, more accessible, and might decrease some of those barriers. Some of the issues that we see with that, again, is that we have this unregulated large language model that is producing text that folks are interacting with, and we're unsure about, is the large language model providing statements that are within the best practice or evidence-based practice that we have and that we know helps folks get better? Are these statements empathic? Are some of these statements dangerous or harmful? So what we've got is different research groups who are also evaluating these large language models in addition to these more controlled conversational bots that are specific for mental health. Next slide, please. So this particular group, Gabriel and colleagues, came out with a recent study that they wanted to test the quality and then also the potential biases of an AI-based chatbot and conversational agent. So they looked at ChatGPT. They did 3 types of evaluation in this particular paper. It's pretty meaty, and so if you go and read this article, I've got the citation in a couple pages, in a couple slides. Chew through it slowly. Again, some of these are pretty hairy and pretty meaty, and I have to take a lot of time to digest them as well. So the essence of it, they did 3 types of evaluations. They did a clinical evaluation, so they had psychologists go through and actually rate based on their epitome framework, which looks at emotional reactions, interpretations, explorations, and then cultivating change talk from the motivational interviewing treatment integrity scale, the MIGHTY, on what is the content of the type of responses that are coming from ChatGPT. They did an evaluation of empathy. So the kind of meta experience of this, they used an AI-based classification model. So again, that's labeling statements that are coming from ChatGPT that have already been identified and labeled by humans in order to train the model. So that's not a generative AI model, that's a classification AI model to say, what is the empathic content of this statement? So they used AI to evaluate AI. That is the meta statement of what they're doing here. And so again, much like we have a problem with evaluating the very large amount of content that's coming from 988 and crisis counseling lines, we're also going to have the problem of being able to evaluate at scale the kind of content that is coming from folks interacting with these large language models. So we're using AI to evaluate AI and empathy. And then these folks also did an evaluation of bias. So when interacting with ChatGPT, they provided statements with explicit identifiers of race. I'm a 32-year-old white woman. I'm a 32-year-old Black woman. I'm an Asian American person. I'm Vietnamese. Whatever statements that were very explicit identifiers of race. And then they used implicit identifiers of race. I gave an example here of one of the statements that was provided to ChatGPT. So being a 32-year-old girl wearing my hair natural. So that was an implicit identifier of race. And they wanted to see what was the difference in empathy across different types of racial identified groups of folks on was the bot more empathic towards certain groups based on what their either implicit or explicit identifiers of race was. So what they found in this study is ChatGPT performed pretty well on emotional reaction exploration and then bringing up client change language. The psychologists who were the humans in the loop in this noted that some of the ChatGPT text was much more direct and might not be in sort of compliance or in adherence with motivational interviewing as an ethos of being really collaborative. ChatGPT performed less well on the interpretation piece and then less well on empathy. And also ChatGPT was less empathic when race was inferred versus when race was more explicit. And so some of the cautionary pieces that these researchers provide, and again, this is one drop in the bucket of a whole ton of research that should be happening and is happening right now, of we need to have continued model training for both statements of implicit and explicit racial identifiers, ethnic identifiers, cultural identifiers. We need to instill that cultural context into these models. having some caution using large language models where the training parameters are really unknown for mental health conversations, and then caution surrounding those large language models in their ability to perform an evidence-based practice like crisis counseling, motivational interviewing, and cognitive behavior therapy. Thanks so much, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Tina. I know we're all trying to catch up with the impact of these AI models on our life and also in how we do mental health work. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to Stephanie Hepburn, Steve Appleton, calling you up. You're going to take us home.
Thanks, Aisha. So I'd like to bring on Steve Appleton. He is the CEO and president of Global Leadership Exchange. And Steve, we're going to be quick, but one area I'd love to touch on from the article was language that you called parity of esteem, which is, I guess, parity of leadership. Could you flesh that out a little bit?
Thanks, Stephanie, and hello, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. The notion of parity of esteem has often been talked about in terms of mental health and physical health and giving that parity of esteem. But at Global Leadership Exchange, particularly in relation to crisis and leadership more broadly, we're interested in the parity of esteem in respect of leadership, i.e. that there is no longer, in our view, a hierarchy around leadership, that anybody that is trying to create transformation and improvement has a leadership role. And that's really, really critical. And it doesn't matter whether you're the chief executive of an organization or you have a fancy title, or if you're somebody working day to day on the front line, as we've been hearing about today, the knowledge and the expertise, the education, the learning that can be brought by bringing people together at different levels from different organizations and different settings is really valuable in creating a knowledge community, which we try to do around the world, but we hope that colleagues in the United States will continue to do, because by doing that, we have a direct and quicker impact on improving services for people in crisis.
And when we talked, we also discussed standardization. You know, you're bringing nations together, leaders from all over the world. And just like how in the US, no two states are identical, no nation is identical to another. But there's a lot of discussion too on what can be standardized versus what can be tailored when it comes to innovations to be nation and population specific. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I think that there are opportunities for standardization, particularly in our use of language, so that there's some sense of consistency in understanding what we mean through certain words and phrases. But there's also something about the importance of tailoring responses to the particular cultural, legal, policy situations that exist in different countries. So what works in the United Kingdom, where I am today, with what works in bits of New Zealand or indeed rural parts of the United States will be different. And you have to tailor the response to be reflective of the circumstances that the people who are experiencing the crisis are living in. But there is some degree of standardization, I think, in relation to what one might expect from a service in terms of quality and outcomes. So there's a balance to be achieved, but cultural, political, socioeconomic contexts are really important when shaping a tailored approach.
When we chatted, we have a little bit more time. When we chatted, you talked about the Pacific Islands, and I thought it was so fascinating because it really could be, what you discussed could be applicable in rural parts of the United States or in Australia. And it shows really how sometimes we create our own barriers of being able to adopt innovations. And this to me was a great example of how that could be adopted, especially in rural or, like you said, geographic areas that are geographically spread apart. Could you talk about that a little bit, specifically about their concept of community-based care?
Sure. I think the concept of community, as described in the article, particularly from a professional's perspective, is about professionals working in buildings that maybe aren't hospitals or are within residential areas, for example, whereas in some of these other settings in the Pacific Islands, and including US Pacific jurisdictions, actually, the notion of communities is not about that. It's about the people who live in the community. It's about your cousin, it's about your neighbor, it's about the person who works in the library or the grocery store, and a community of support, a little bit like a community of practice in some sense, where people can share their concerns. They feel able to do that. There's not a stigmatization around talking about those issues. And in a way, that community-based support enables people, hopefully, to feel more comfortable about seeking help. It helps them to avoid acute crisis more often, potentially. And it also means that the community is incredibly mental health aware. So I think there are lessons to be learned in different directions. And that's what an exchange is really about. Let's learn from what happens in those communities, and they can learn from us. And that's where you get that standardization versus tailored approach fitting together really nicely.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on with me.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Stephanie. Thank you, Steve. So we're at the end. Just want to flag for you what's coming up next week. A reminder, we'll be looking at a debate on 988 fee legislation. So please come back next week, share it with your colleagues. We have 2 weeks. Are you ready? Advanced Crisis Systems for Care with Monica Johnson. That will also be fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. It's been really amazing to be with you here today. This is always packed with so much dense and important information. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and see you next week. Take care.